Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the NB Poli podcast. We are here in Menaquist, also known as St. John, New Brunswick, the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, and Pescatoma Makati. So we're here actually at the Tool Library.
Yeah, weird
on
background.
location.
Very abnormal background for us. Those
yeah.
of you who are commenting on the plants in our background, those are gone, and you got some very janky woodworking happening with a bunch of tools laying around. That's because there's stuff going on at our house.
Yes. So, but today we have some guests we've been teasing for ages. So it's time.
Yes. So
finally.
we've been talking about it, and of course, any of our listeners, you remember we've been doing this little sort of tiptoeing into the NDP leadership race, but also sort of federal connections.
Mhm.
So now we've got two really great guests. We have Jordan Leichnitz and we have Matt Whynot. I'm going to bring them on right now. Hello, everybody.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to the MB Polypod.
Got it.
Excited
to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Always we start with, who are you? Why'd you get into politics? And I think, just spelling out this connection piece to, obviously your why on how you get into politics may predate what you're doing currently. So we'll also add that, the current affairs, if you will. Why don't we start with
You go first.
You
Matt.
go
Okay,
first,
cool.
Matt.
Okay.
Awesome. I was watching, I would watch elections on CBC right across the country. There were two incidences that happened. So one was my aunt was an employee relations officer with the Nova Scotia Government and General Employees Union. And so when I was a kid, she would travel around the province doing what she would do, negotiating contracts for the people she represented. And I would go to the hotel rooms and I'd get to, go and, go swimming and do the fun stuff. But also, I remember going to pick a line with my mom, and she was a nurse, LPN. And I remember it was in 1998, and I remember we were out picketing, and I remember there were three politicians standing up in front of these nurses. And I asked my mom, I said, why, who are these people? Why are these people different? And she said, these people care about me. And it was Daryl Dexter,
yes,
Robert Chisholm, and Alexa McDonough. And ever since then, I kind of I had the bug. And like I said, watched elections. I remember getting the paper, when we were out camping in the summer, get the paper during the 1998 election. And I remember that election because the headline was 19 Liberal, 19 NDP, and 7 Conservatives in Nova Scotia. And we were on the cusp going from 3 seats to 19, essentially almost forming the next government.
Dang.
And so I was never, locked in ever since. And I show up at the local campaign office in 2003. They never called. I wanted to become a member of the party, and they never called me because they thought I was a liberal spy. But then come to find out after, I got involved in the party and ended up being a candidate in 2006. I was what we would call a name on the ballot.
Yep.
I actually, I almost won to the
shoot.
Minister of Health by 526 votes, and then ended up getting elected in 2009 as the youngest MLA in Nova Scotia's history. So here I am.
How old would you have been in 2009?
I was 23.
23.
Oh, wow.
Dang. Okay. Yeah. Really young.
Yeah, I was the government whip and sitting on a bunch of cabinet committees. So as a nerd,
Was that Daryl Dexter's government that you were in?
Yeah.
So majority,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So not as much work for the whip then.
Oh no, it was
Not as much stress. Or
No,
was.
it was because I was 23 telling
Yeah, it's just,
55 people. Anyways, and then
hey,
and now
yeah.
I've been a
Wow.
campaign
Good for you.
director. I've worked in campaigns across the country, and now I have the amazing
Okay.
opportunity to work for the Canadian Labour Congress. So yeah, that's me. Short.
Beautiful. We love the Labour Congress. Every
Yeah.
time we go to FCM,
Yeah.
we always hang out with the Labour Congress longest. just play Jenga
Too.
at their booth, and we love to chat with them. All right, Jordan, over to you.
That's good. It's good. Yeah. See, Matt's literally been in the right. So,
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for this connection.
so my getting involved in politics, I guess you could say I'm an unintended consequence of the Mike Harris government in Ontario, because I grew
Cause
up
and effect.
that's right. I grew up in the 90s, and I was a kid when a lot of those cutbacks and changes went through the school system, and I saw how it impacted my teachers, my education. You know, we would go 2/3 of the year before we had any textbooks, among other things. And so that was originally actually what politicized me. And I got involved in some of the student walkouts and the activism that happened there. My parents were both journalists, so we talked a lot of politics at the kitchen table, although I'm not sure that they knew that they were accidentally creating a socialist, but you know, that was where we landed, or at least where I landed. And I felt that my politics were represented. And so I think, like many people my age, I probably watched like way too much West Wing. And so when it came time to decide what I wanted to do for university, I was determined to head to Ottawa and to study political science. And I did that. And through that, I continued, like I was involved through activism. So at the time, that would have, you know, that was anti-war activism. 2003, and I became also really involved in the women's rights movement here in Canada. And so I did my undergraduate, my graduate degree, and through that work, I got really involved in civil society, and I was doing government relations and advocacy campaigns, and I loved that work, and I found it really amazing and invaluable, but I wanted to be closer to where the decisions were being made, because I saw how hard it was when those voices were being really shut out of government decision making. This was all during sort of, you know, the early Harper era as well, leading into that period. And so I started working on Parliament Hill under Jack Layton in 2009. I started originally as a research officer, and then I spent a decade on Parliament Hill, and I did all kinds of different work, everything from platform writing to issues management to some opposition research work, and eventually deputy chief of staff, and was able to have contact with lots of the different political and policy struggles and challenges over that period. So I left the Hill in 2020, had, you know, young family, and it's a kind of a tough circle to square with active political work, but I've been enjoying what I'm doing since, which is talking politics a lot, but also doing some work internationally with a political foundation based out of Germany. So that's what I do for my day job now, and get to still stay in touch with all of these really important issues all across the country.
Yeah, this is great. No, I mean, Jordan, we obviously pay a lot of attention to, like we were saying, Curse and other shows that I'll hear you a lot on CBC now. And it's one of those things that for me personally, and I think for Joe as well, whenever we were listening to podcasts, very hard to come by somebody, and that could be not just podcasts, the news in general. Very hard to come by somebody that is sitting there and able to capture how a bunch of us are thinking about it.
Yeah, that's it. That's how I feel when I hear you speak, Jordan, is like, I feel like you're speaking for me in all these circles, and it's really interesting to listen to you have a role to play in these largely male-dominated political talking circles.
Well,
you know?
thank you.
So I
I'm gonna argue and swear with
that.
the best of them and do weekly, and yeah, and I think, you know, credit to David Hurley, you know, for the space he's created for that as well. I think we don't have so many spots where people can talk politics seriously across party lines. So I feel pretty lucky.
Yeah, no, I agreed. So let's get into the politics. And Matt, you wanted to talk about Chris D'Entremont. And
breaking news.
Breaking news. It's obviously been breaking now for over a week, and there is no shortage of perspective on it. But what is missing, I feel, from the perspective on Chris D'Entremont crossing the floor, as well as the resignation, which I understand Matt's resignation is now delayed till May. Is that still the case? We don't know. So anyway, we'll just talk about Chris for now, but obviously there's some chaos occurring in Pierre Poilievre's camp. Not surprised by the way, based on how we've been talking about good old PP here in New Brunswick for the past 2 years. Not surprising. But Matt, why don't you start us off? What does this floor crossing mean? Obviously, you're in Nova Scotia, so you're closest to the ground here. So fill us in on what you're seeing and hearing on your end of things.
So I'll put a big asterisk on this, and that Chris is a dear friend of mine.
Right. Okay.
We were MLAs together. Put it in perspective for you in that Chris was an EA to the Minister of Finance in Nova Scotia from 1999 to when he got elected in 2006.
Wow.
He's been around as progressive conservative for a very long time.
Yeah.
So this whole notion that some folks are spinning that it was like off the cuff and he got because of he didn't get the deputy speaker's job. I don't think that's true. I think that if you know Chris, he's a good guy.
Yeah. Doesn't really care much for the spotlight the same way.
Yeah, like he's a good guy. And anybody who you talk with, I mean, there's been lots of phone calls that I've had with former colleagues since last week, and it's clear that everybody says that. Right. And I know his wife, and I know his kids, and I know that this was not taken out of some sort of random, some random thought. He's been thinking about this clearly for a while, and he's told his story. I saw it on CBC yesterday on Rosemary Barton Live. He was on there for an extended interview, and he, it was very clear that he's thinking about this for a long time. So I think that floor crossings are always interesting. At the end of the day, I tend to still think that politicians are people, and if your value system is one that doesn't align with your party or your leader or what have you, it's going to eat at you. And it's going to be a reason why you make the move or sit as an independent or quit altogether. The voters will have their say next time around, whether or not he runs again, even, and they'll make that decision. I was at a spot in time in Nova Scotia where the interim Conservative leader crossed the Liberals in 2010, and it was very clear. And guess what? She ran and won 3 more times.
Yeah.
Now, historically, I think that's different depending on province and what parliament we're talking about. But we'll see how it goes. I was at the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities meeting all this past week, and obviously that was the buzz. I mean, oh my God, it was. He did what he had to do. I can't believe he
did that. Right. Before I want to go to you, Jordan, because you've been talking about this just for a very long time over the past week on multiple shows. So, but before I do that, Matt, with regards to Chris and this floor crossing, do you get the sense that Nova Scotians that voted conservative, because I'm pretty shocked. Maybe that means I'm naive. I'm not sure. But the conservative spin machine seems to be now in this zone of like political purists. Like all of a sudden we are partisan purists, and we could never imagine such behavior amongst our, and it's just like it's a bit bizarre because I don't think of Canadians as being obliquely partisan. We tend to be nonpartisan human beings, and we tend to look down upon people who are involved in, not look down, that's not the right word, but we just tend to not be that same level that the United States is. So is that the case? Are conservatives in his riding sort of shouting from the rooftops, "You stole our money, we can't believe you lied to us," and all that? Like, what's the buzz?
Oh, there's some of them. I don't think it's, they're not parading in the streets or anything yet. So we'll see if that does happen. In Nova Scotia, we had the famous floor crossing from Bill Casey, right? He sat as an independent and then stepped down, ran again as a Liberal, and he was kind of the the famous Nova Scotian who stood up against the power.
Yeah.
Right, this isn't my party anymore. I mean, I'm interested to see if there's more.
Yeah, we are.
I think that there are, quote, red Tories out there that just don't see this as their party. And I would say, I mean, that's what we see at the provincial levels, depending on what province we're talking about. But Tories in provincial, we don't have Tim Houston running out and getting a picture of Pierre Poilievre, right? We don't have the new premier of Newfoundland doing that. So I think, that. You're not, and they'll stay out of it. I think there'll be some of their caucus members who will get into it, like the former MP in South St. Margaret's ripped Chris a new one, and it was not like, it just made him look nutty, right? Rob Batherson, the former president of the Conservative Party, who, I've gone to things, worked together with him on some things. He went over and above. So clearly he's hurt, but I would guess, maybe not to speak for them, but I would guess that there's some, not just hurt there, it's that they probably know it's true too.
Yeah, fair enough. That makes sense. Now, Jordan, put this into some perspective here. Obviously, everybody's wondering, is there going to be a bunch more floor crossers?
Mm-hmm.
Do you personally think that Pierre has so played his hand over and over again that it's just inadvertently, no, not inadvertently, I guess intentionally isolated these types of folks from, I guess, are they even interested in trying to keep red Tories from your perspective? Or
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're definitely interested in keeping them, and you can see that from the reaction that Poilievre and the team around him have to D'Entremont's departure. That was an immediate lockdown, right? And we don't know what he and his 2-3 statements about why they're leaving. It's a bit weird, right? So there was clearly some sort of pressure applied there, I think, to make him behave in the way that he did. And you can surmise from that there may have been other people who were maybe advanced as well in their discussions with the Liberals who decided not to make the jump after they saw what happened. But I think the problem for Poilievre is that, it's already a bit of an uneasy fit in terms of some of these red Tories. And of course, I think particularly Nova Scotia Conservatives they're a bit different, right? Like that is a type of conservatism that is not in vogue in Poilievre's Conservative Party, that he himself doesn't really have much truck and trade with. Now, he still wants those people because that speaks to his leadership and it speaks to sort of the national capacity of the party. But the way that he behaved in reaction to D'Entremont's crossing, and so the way the party behaved, and you can think about, for example, after the floor crossing happened, that says that he's a liar and that, it was really quite vicious. I think probably a response like that is in the end going to do more to actually drive people away than it is going to solidify what's happening internally. Because now you've got a situation where you have to imagine that within that caucus, you have kind of different camps looking at each other now. And anybody who was on that short list of people who might have been considering or maybe was talking to the Liberals, it's pretty well known who might be on that list. And they are definitely being watched by their peers now. And they've seen what happens, right? When somebody steps out. But I would argue that the almost the bullying kind of response to it from Poilievre might even push people a little bit further away at the end of the day. Now, all that said, I don't really think it's not going to have any impact on him in his leadership review in January, because that's about him by what he's doing. And so I think it doesn't shift that for him. But for sure, he is weakened, he is more off balance right now. And if there were to be further departures, then I think it puts him at greater risk actually from his own caucus than anything else.
Yeah, I had. So you're saying that you don't think Pierre Poilievre's leadership's at stake, but I do. And
I mean, in January, January. In January.
January, right?
If there's
Yeah,
more that
okay.
happens between now and then, but I think the people holding the knife would be his caucus,
Right.
not the
Yes.
members.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So that would be under the Reform Act, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And now when and they can invoke that pretty much at any time.
Yep.
Yeah, because I mean, you look. I mean, Justin Trudeau was so unpopular, and everybody was so frustrated with Justin Trudeau that everybody was just begging for somebody to dunk on the guy. And then Pierre Poilievre showed up with the biggest baseball bat and went to town, and everybody loved it. But now it's the bit's worn off, and I have a difficult time seeing how he's ever going to increase his not just his likability, but his ability to persuade folks like us, who we would call ourselves, and I'll pass it over to you, Joe. We would call it, probably not. But you look at progressive conservatism in its semi-regenesis, I guess. It's kind of coming back in some ways from the long old days of Elsie Wayne when she was the former leader of the two-person caucus that was left before Stephen Harper finished the job. And it's like, we have a person here in New Brunswick, Daniel Alain, who's running for the Progressive Conservative Party of New Brunswick. And he's sort of like the first progressive conservative that we've seen in probably...
Well, he has Chris D'Entremont's story. He started as a deputy minister in the early 2000s and then became an MLA, and now he's going to go there. But he has a bigger tent. He's not this like hard right type like our former premier was. So who knows? I think he's essentially will be more like the early 2000s conservatives for this province. But
our Lord.
I'd love to shift over though to, both of you are these NDP experts, so I think we need to start gearing towards that now as we, have looked at Nova Scotia. So I'd love to hear maybe Matt talk a little bit about the Atlantic perspective, and then I'd love, Jordan, you just to tell us more about how we're perceived, honestly, because it just feels like sometimes the machine runs outside of here, and we sort of get that trickle down of whatever's left over. It's kind of a region that's...
New Brunswick's the size of Mississauga, but yet it's hidden, legislatively at a level that it really should not be. But that's true of the entire Atlantic region. So when it comes, I guess right. How do we get perceived on this scale of things when you've got Quebec and Ontario and even BC that will come in and sort of rule the day on who's more important?
Maybe we're not important, and maybe that's the reality check we need.
But that is it. And maybe we'll start with you on that front, Matt. Like, how do we, from a third party's perspective, what have you seen? Like, as you were saying, what have you seen and how the relationship exists when you have an NDP government at the federal level with the NDP? Just from a strictly a partisan perspective, go up and have sort of some gravity behind your group in Nova Scotia, or are you guys kind of relegated to the backbenches?
So before I start, maybe answer that question, I just remind everyone that in 1997, when we had the quote breakthrough with Alexa McDonough, we won a ton of seats in Atlantic Canada, like more than in 2011
under Jack Layton,
right?
Yeah.
So we had, so we held the 4 seats in Halifax. We found 2 in Cape Breton. We had 2 in New Brunswick. Everyone forget about Beauce Jour. We won that seat for a year, and then she crossed the floor, went to the Tories. In 97. I could be wrong on that. Yeah. So
right.
If you take the picture of, I think at that time there'd probably be 32 seats in Atlantic Canada. The NDP held a significant number of them. So why is that? Probably because we were talking about the issues that people actually cared about, because at that time EI was being gutted.
Yeah.
And Cape Bretoners and Northern New Brunswickers were seeing the bulk of that, whether you worked in public service, whether you were a fisher person, whether you, healthcare was being gutted. So we are seeing that again, right? This is like we have to remember that the Carney government. So go back to Chris. If Justin Trudeau was still the prime minister, Chris would not have crossed the floor.
Right.
Okay. He sees Mark Carney as a red Tory, I would say even a progressive conservative.
Yes.
And even in Nova Scotia politics recently, the premier Stephen McNeil, who was the Liberal premier in Nova Scotia from 2013 until 2021, he was more progressive. He was more conservative than the Conservatives were. Gutting programs, pushing young people away, blah blah blah, you name it. So I think this is what the next number of months is going to set for us in Atlantic Canada. Even worse, I think, in particular, through the public service cuts and potential EI changes and so forth. So just to kind of set it up, that there is hope, I would suggest, but we have to be organized, and we have to do the work in having conversations like this. Doing, as we all know, organizing on the ground, and doing the hard stuff to ask people for money and everything else. There are days it's hard to be a New Democrat. There is no doubt in my mind. Mm-hmm. Depending on where you live in the country, mind you, we look at places like Manitoba, we look at BC, we look at in the Yukon, they just formed the official opposition. So literally in every province, at a provincial level, the NDP is either government or the official opposition, other than Quebec, New Brunswick.
Yeah, there's some good recent results.
I think the opportunity is there, and what goes up must come down. And so, I think that if we run really good campaigns, like for instance in Nova Scotia with Claudia Chender, she's a rock star, smart,
I agree.
commands the room, knows how to connect with people. And as someone who's on the party executive and things, I'm certainly pushing to, start nominations, make sure we find the candidates that we need to win, and really get behind this, because, our ability to fundraise here, organize here, knock on doors, is what we do. I knock on doors once a month with my MLA. That's how we win. And the best thing that we can do for the next reach of candidates is to shore up the ones we got. And that's been the driving force behind everything that we're doing here. Anyways, the moral of the story, we got to work. And guess what? As progressive lefties, social democrats, we have to work 6 times harder than everybody else.
Yeah, no, yeah, we know. We ran for the Greens.
It does feel like that, and it feels like there's such a more difficult time to also get people to come on the team. Like, I've never found that simple to connect people to that grander mission, to work 6 times as hard to do something.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's not a selling pitch, is it?
No. Do you guys want to sign up for something really difficult?
Yeah.
Here it comes up to us.
Exactly.
So sorry if you guys can hear that background noise. Can you hear that?
The town is growing.
That's good. You're building housing back there. That's good.
My house, my job sits down there, but somebody just pulled up in the street. So Jordan, over to your end of things. Same kind of question here. Like, we're trying to locate ourselves, because then I think the conversation can zero in a little bit more from the upper down to the New Brunswick, the eastern.
Yeah.
Matt, you're doing a good job filling in some of those blanks here for us, but zoom us back out again, Jordan, and situate us.
Well, as a almost 30-year Ontarian, I think I can speak to sort of how Atlantic Canada is perceived within that crowd. And Democrats, I would say it's actually seen as pretty important, and some of that has to do with the party actually having quite long roots. For example, in Nova Scotia, CCF has very long roots, in particular in parts of Cape Breton. So this goes back right to the story of the party's origin. And the second thing is really connection to issues, as Matt talked about. So, if you want to talk about over the last few years and decades, this is everything from workplace conditions to employment insurance. It's addressing poverty and inequality. It's strengthening healthcare systems. These are all questions that are huge nationally, but they're particularly huge in Atlantic Canada. And so there's always been, I think, good alignment in terms of the issues of concern for the federal party and for people in Atlantic Canada. And then the second thing is that I think one of the things, the federal NDP faces a lot of challenges electorally in our first past the post system. And one of the reasons that they face challenges is because the party is one of the last truly national parties where you can say, obviously to some greater and lesser degrees with Quebec, but you can say that they are really contesting in every province and territory across the country. And they have some gain or to grow a beachhead from. And that's actually very hard to do. And if you look at nationally, if you look at the Liberals, they've really become an Atlantic party, a Quebec party, and an Ontario party. And and with the last election, of course, as an exception to the rule, they have struggled west of Ontario. And whereas you're seeing Conservatives also entrench themselves as the more Western-based party, to the detriment of their support in other parts of the country. But the New Democrats are kind of trying to grow in all regions. And so that means it does matter what happens in Atlantic Canada. Now, I would say, historically, what has been maybe a bigger challenge in Atlantic Canada for New Democrats than in other places is that Atlantic Canada is seen as very entrenched in a two-party system. Very entrenched as people vote Liberal or Conservative and may have actually done so for generations.
Yes, definitely.
And that there's not a lot of fluidity between those vote pools and not a lot of ability for people to kind of easily consider other voting options. And when you look at the exceptions to that rule, they really tend to be grounded around sort of exceptional candidates, exceptional leaders, people who have a really strong. And so, we can talk about in New Brunswick, we can talk about somebody like Yvon Gaudin, right? So there's, somebody who, of course, was known as a champion on the question of things like employment insurance and workplace safety and bilingualism. And Yvon was Yvon, right? He just so happened to be a New Democrat because that was his politics. But he was really there because he was charismatic and very, very good at representing his region. And I think that, when you look at what's happening provincially, you can see, Nova Scotia has this tradition as well, and that Claudia Chender is maybe a leader in that mold as well. And that, we can talk more about some of the things that they've been doing in their campaigning there that I think are really promising. But I think that the challenge for the NDP in terms of access, where they've had candidates who are very strong, who are very well known. You can think about people like Jack Harris in Newfoundland, Lorraine Michael. These are people who were very trusted because of either their prior political work or, in Jack's case, work on related into greater support for the party, where they were then able to kind of pull others along with them. But in terms of breaking out of that two-party system, historically, we've needed somebody who has that really strong root and that strong personal connection in each of those provinces in order to get that train going.
And can I just add to that just a little bit? I think that sometimes the trouble is in New Brunswick, they want to latch on to these issues that people aren't sitting at the table talking about at supper, right?
right.
I think that they want to go down these routes because they see maybe in some places, talking about quote affordability doesn't mean anything to people, except I think what should be asked is what keeps you up at night. Yeah, people are not worried about this issue XYZ that it might affect 12 people and that's important, but you got to come up a little higher so you get a broader base of people that are getting the head nod test when you talk about these issues.
It seems to me that the left specifically in New Brunswick, and maybe you can corroborate this, or you can say it's different in Nova Scotia, Matt, and same with yourself, Jordan. The left here feel very immature. And I say that, saying that about myself. I ran in 2020, same with you, when you ran in 2020 and you doubled the vote count in a place only to have it collapse back to kind of what it was when you run again, even with a bigger profile as a city councilor. And it just, what I mean by that is the party seems to be going through a bit of a maturity moment. And I don't want to say Jagmeet was an immature leader, but I think a lot of immaturity got ascribed to the party, perceived in the party, not talking about the right issues, like you say, Matt, when Jagmeet was leader. Now we're at a point where there's new leaders contesting the field, trying to score on the empty net that Mark Carney has left around issues that are more on this side of things, like we talked about. But in New Brunswick specifically, there's still a lot of purity tests, right? Like if you haven't used the right pronoun for somebody, they're going to remember it, and everybody in that party is going to know about it. And I don't want to demean that. It's important to get that right. But I know people who have done that wrong and been gone. There's not even a second or a third chance. You messed up, you're gone. If you don't have the right take on something when it comes to even a quality of life issue, right? That's it. You're gone. You're out. And so I look at that and I say, is there a leader right now that we can talk about that in the national race for the federal leadership that seems to be aware of that and is trying to do something about it? Or do we? Because I think that's what it's going to take. Where it's going to take an influx of people who realize the world's gray. You can't look at it like.
Well, the Green leadership race was a great example of that. Like a bunch of idealistic things, like, are you pro-Israel, anti-Israel? What does all of that look like? And it became the thing. And it just looked so divided for the Greens, and it was a big disaster.
Yeah, has a national party ever died because of their foreign policy take? Like, I don't have ever seen it before, but it certainly happened there. And this is kind of what I'm getting at, exactly that, right? You have this strange, odd group of people who don't seem to understand what real life is, that make up the bulwark of the party faithful, that don't have any hope of recruiting someone like, I would say us, or other people who have run and know what it's like to run and know what it's like to be in a position of governance and know what that looks like and know what's there the possible is and what isn't. Do we see that occurring on the federal leadership level here? And if so, with who? Or are they doing it in different ways?
Go ahead, Jordan.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, I'm happy to speak to that because I think you're right to name that there is certainly a tension. I think within the broader left, and the NDP is no exception to this, on that question. And I think how the party expresses, for example, identity politics as compared to a more classical class politics is really at the heart of a lot of the discussions that are happening in the leadership race. And I think part of that comes from the fact that we've seen a big change on the right side of the political spectrum over the last few years, where parties on the right have actually become very effective at communicating with working class voters. Now, they tend to pull people over and communicate and connect with those voters around a politics of resentment, which I think we can talk about some of the ways in which that's detrimental to our politics writ large. But it is very effective because people are feeling not just worried, but they're feeling really precarious. And so in that space, they hear a party that's talking to them and sort of saying like, well, if you agree with me on one thing, then come on in and we'll work on the rest, right? Whereas historically in the left, sometimes our approach has more been, like, unless you meet all of these tests, then we're going to make it like a less welcoming place for you. And so there's an obvious downside to that, which is that it makes it more difficult to bring more people into that movement. And so I think what you're seeing right now is a grappling with the question of how does the party, and maybe the broader left in general, but certainly you see it in the leadership race, how do you stay true to those values of inclusion, which are so important? Like the party is never going to be anti-trans or anti-LGBTQ or anti-racist, and it shouldn't be. Like those are incredibly important core values for the party. But how do you have those values and live those values while also opening the door to people who maybe haven't felt like it's a welcoming space for them? And so that's what you're seeing. And I think that you're seeing all the leadership candidates talk about that issue in different ways. And certainly, I think Rob Ashton, of course, so he's from Longshore Workers Union.
Yep.
You hear him talking very, very clearly, very strongly around a class politics of the party. You've heard Heather McPherson, in her own words, talk about purity politics.
Yep.
So that's how she talks about it. I mean, I think that is probably on her part a bit deliberately provocative in terms of opening up that conversation. And Avi Lewis, for his part, he rejects that language. But I would note, like, his framing, if you look at what he's putting out in his campaign, is still mostly around kind of bread and butter issues, right? Like, he is focusing a lot also on affordability and on things that would fall more in a classical kind of class politics type approach. So I think that you're seeing them all grapple with that question to a certain degree. How do you maintain those values? How do you make sure that remains core to what the party's doing? But how do you try to set the table to reconnect with some of those voters who maybe haven't felt like the NDP is a natural political home for them over the last few years? And I'd say, like, this is a pretty urgent question for the party, because if you look at where in the last federal election, where did the votes bleed? So between 2021 and 2025, where did that vote go? So you had about 2/3 of that vote went to the Liberals. And we can make an argument that a lot of that might have been circumstantial. If it weren't for example, the tariff war, if it weren't for the specificity of Kearney instead of Trudeau, maybe, you would have been able to retain some of those votes. A lot of those votes also bled because they saw, so some of that was strategic as well. But the challenge, I think, for the NDP is that when you look at where the rest of the vote bleed went, so about 1/3 of the remaining vote, that bled Conservative. And that's actually a lot more structural. That trend is more structural. And that's like, I should also say, like, it's not unique to Canada. Like, we do see this across the Western world. We see it in Europe. We see it in the United States, where there is an increasing move of working class voters, not just to the right, but in a lot of cases in Europe, you're seeing actually to far right parties.
Yeah.
And there really hasn't been like one cohesive answer about how to stop that. But I would say that what evidence we do have is that you can open the door back up to some of those voters by countering that politics of resentment with one of respect, basically. That says that this is a form of populism that actually connects with regular people and working people with respect for who they are, for what they do, for where they are in life. And that is a really different type of politics from what we've often seen in Ottawa over the last few decades, which is a very kind of like expert dominated, Ottawa knows best, and I mean, ironically, this is like exactly 100% the type of federal government we have right now.
Oh my God, it's the embodiment of it.
It really speaks to the exceptionality of this moment and of Carney's ability to win in a moment of like really what a global populist surge.
Yeah.
He is the opposite of that. But that's also the uniqueness of this past campaign. So I'd say this is definitely a conversation that's happening in the federal NDP leadership race. And I think we're going to see a lot more of it as they get more into debates and discussions over the next few months.
Can I riff on that for a sec? And in particular, Jordan, like, brilliant. Brent, you said something about candidates and like, getting good people to run and trying to swoo members to vote for you and the leadership, and I've chatted with almost all of the people that are currently running for the party, and what I find interesting, it's been, I want to talk to you because you are super important. Great. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. But I don't want you to just tell me what I want to hear. So if you know that I work in the labor movement, that I was a candidate, as an MLA, that I was the party organizer in Atlantic, Canada for 2 elections, and they're like, oh, I really want to talk to you. But they are telling me what I want to hear. and I just don't know if that's the right approach. I'll also say, like, if these candidates are telling people, like, say for instance, we approached one of you to run for the party, the honest conversation is, all right, folks, guess what? This is going to take at best 3 elections. Are you in it? Because we have to be honest with them that there's no infrastructure, there's no money,
Yep.
But we need you to help build. And when you look for New Democrats, it's like, the idea that you win on the first go around is really unheard of.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's unheard of, and I think that we need to be open and honest with people that we talk to, and that's how whenever I do candidate search, that's what I say to people, like, maybe I'm doing it wrong.
No, I think you're right, but I do think, in light of that, so to try to to bridge these points here, we have, I agree, Jordan, I've listened to Avi, I've listened to Heather, and I've listened to why did I just blank on his name on
Rob.
BBC? Rob, thank you. Rob Ashton. I've listened to them a few times. They do seem to be aware that the party went into a direction that became too nebulous for the average Canadian around its issue set and how we talked about things and approached it. They're trying to bring us back into this, like, hey, do you make less than $150,000 a year? Okay, so do I. We're probably far more aligned than the guys over there making 250 plus, right? And that I've been desperate to hear from people who speak that way, quite honestly, because I'm really tired of working in this nonprofit world and seeing people who, I could go on a big tangent, I won't, but like seeing people who don't understand what it's like to have a lack of shelter stability in their housing lead the policy charge on housing. And I see it all the time, and it just murders me because the people closest to the problem are often the best suited to solve it. And I kind of can hear some of that from these leaders. When what you're talking about, Matt, is we need stayers, right? If the NDP is going to be successful in re-emerging in Atlantic Canada, there needs to be stayers. The problem I've seen is that the candidates that have come around, and even we've seen this, I don't know if you think differently, but well, I guess you would think the same way, but the when people gather around you to run for a third party, we're not talking about the two main parties because they just have a weird pecking order, and if you've high-fived enough liberals or conservatives, you're the next in line. We'll see you there. Doesn't matter if you're from the community, if you're well liked, you're running the guy. With the third parties, it's different, but the party faithful don't seem to be loyal. The people that help get you into that candidate slot don't seem to want to stick with the candidate long term, right? So, like, it's one thing to ask a candidate, are you willing to bang it out for 3 election cycles, lose 3 election cycles? Because we see that in the States.
Mm-hmm.
You brought that to my attention recently about how some of these Congress people will do 4 or 5 runs before they get there to try to bring down the sort of the status quo that takes 40 years sometimes or 30 years to pull away. But we don't seem to have in New Brunswick, maybe it's different in Nova Scotia, party faithful that really want to show up and stick it out. I actually think it's the same with the Liberals and the Conservatives. They're all bleeding volunteers. They all seem more disorganized than the last time around. I've still got, from a Liberal leadership candidate, like a call log I shouldn't have. No one's called me back to get it. No, I'm not going to be inappropriate with people's private information. But I looked at the other day, I was like, holy, someone should know that I have this, and I don't have. They don't, and I don't think there's even anybody at the helm anymore. Like, I don't even know who to call to give this back to them, right? So it just seems like
Party politics is a little.
It's depleted
depressing.
across the board, and like, is there any, like, what is the connection point for these federal leadership candidates and Atlantic Canada? I take your point about I think you mentioned Claire in Halifax, right?
Claudia.
Claudia, not Claire.
Yeah.
Claudia. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, they're doing the work. There's no doubt in my mind that they're doing the work. I mean, everybody's getting calls. I don't think many of them have been out here yet. So I'll just sort of, I don't know, not wrap it up. I'll just kind of put a nice little bow on this and look back in time, just in times of like when leaders come and go. I would argue, Brent, that in Nova Scotia, and really quite frankly across Atlantic Canada, there are New Democrats, and I'll just speak for the NDP, who do, when things hit rock bottom, folks come out of the woodwork, because the folks that have been around for much longer than I have will come out because they recognize that they've been here before too. And I will say, and I've said this in public spaces before, when Gary Burrell was elected leader of our party in Nova Scotia, I said, I'll be a member, I'm out.
Yeah.
Because I decided that wasn't my style of leadership that I wanted. When growth happened and there was work done in between elections, and then they realized that maybe we do need to listen and talk with some folks who've been around a lot longer, and brought them in, that's when I said, okay, maybe it's my time to come back. And like I said, leaders come and go. Some of you may not, well, I think Jordan definitely knows this. Jack Layton, we did not want him to come to Atlantic Canada in any way, shape, or form in any election that he was leader of the federal party.
That's right.
The used car salesman from Toronto, this guy should not step foot in Nova Scotia, where we were on the cusp of forming government.
A lot of requests to miss us with this guy.
Oops. Did we forget Halifax? Did we forget Sydney because, the plane couldn't land? Yeah. And so then he became the best thing since sliced bread. In fact, hugged him as much as we could, because our leader, our premier, was not the most popular human in the world. So leaders come and go. The party's not going anywhere. It's going to take a lot of work. But I do know that it's New Democrats are always up for a fight, and I know that the people that are running for leader will do that, and it's going to be exciting. It's my sense.
And maybe if I can just build off of what Matt was saying there, because I think that there's also a lesson to be taken in terms of party capacity at the provincial level from what Claudia Tender and the Nova Scotia NDP have done. So, like, if you look at their last election results, they were, she's been talking about issues that are obviously connecting with people in Nova Scotia, been crisscrossing the province, but was very disciplined on focusing on seats around Halifax that were winnable for the party, and in doing so was able to go +3 in the last election, secure status. And then that's about getting, yes, more MLAs, but also like more resources, more capacity. And that is how you kind of are able to rebuild and solidify those structures. So I think that like that, an approach like that is smart, it's strategic, and like that's part of like rebuilding capacity over the long term, especially in areas where it's been lost over the course of a few cycles.
And I'll riff on that. Like this notion that New Democrats aren't don't come from rural communities. In Nova Scotia, even prior to being government, over half of our seats were in rural Nova Scotia. Yeah. People don't talk about that. And that's what I often remind folks is that's where you get your foothold. That's where you can start. So in the last,
because the candidate matters more in the rural areas, right?
Totally.
Yeah, totally. And there were a couple of seats, 3 or 4, where our votes in rural went up like almost by 10% in rural ridings, even with a name on a ballot. So our message was resonating. So imagine what we can do when we talk to people between elections, when we find the right candidates and we do the fundraising. That is like the super sauce to get us to where we need to be going into the next election.
Wow.
We're out of time.
We're out of time.
Any parting shots for you, Joe?
I mean, we hail from the city, St. John, where Elizabeth Weir was the only NDP MLA for years and years and years. She lives around the corner from here.
Sure.
So we certainly have seen the impossible happen right here in St. John. So I appreciate you sharing all this.
Yeah.
And
I think we're secretly hopeful and optimistic humans, even though the last
we've been
probably 6 months of
cynical.
VODs, we've sounded more cynical, but
Yeah,
we
for sure. But no, I love.
That's what keeps politics
Yeah.
exciting. It's the art of the possible,
Exactly.
right?
So thank you both for joining us, and we'll share your contact online so people can find you.
yes, and
to learn more.
we will be back. I think this is a great springboard conversation for whenever we figure. I was going to ask if there was any predictions on leadership winners, but I won't do that.
Oh yeah,
So whoever
too
wins,
soon. Too soon.
whenever
Too
they
soon.
win, we got to come back because I think there will be some good hinge points there that we can talk about.
Be great. Thanks for having us.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thank
Have a
you so
great
much,
day.
guys. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you later.